Superman and Lois, Season 3, Episode 12, Injustice. This episode begins with a glimpse of Lois's post-surgical recovery and a voiceover of Lois's internal struggle with healing and getting her confidence back, and how she isn't sure she'll ever get her confidence back completely, and how it feels like an injustice, and who she is now is going to just have to be enough. And I wish the episode continued on this trajectory, but it didn't. We immediately switch to Lex Luthor, who has been in prison for nearly 2 decades for a crime he did not commit, largely thanks to an article Lois wrote. Then we get Sons of Anarchy Lex Luthor. This isn't the sophisticated suit-wearing Luthor I am used to seeing, and the episode starts doing time jumps to get us caught up on Luthor's background story of his time in prison, which shows him to be a monster. Back at the high school, George Jr. has contacted the media about the superhero who saved him and Sarah. Some of the other kids were making fun of Jr. Jordan sticks up for him and says that he thinks whoever saved Jr. and Sarah did a good job. Of course, Sarah takes this the wrong way and tells her mom that Jordan is bragging at school, which leads Lana to tell Lois and Clark, who come down on Jordan, which causes more friction between them and Jordan, and between Jordan and Sarah, and leads to Jordan acting out and making a public appearance in costume. Jonathan is having trouble with Kyle treating him differently now that Kyle knows Superman is his dad. So Clark goes and speaks to Kyle. Kyle then tells Jonathan to come to him next time instead of going to his dad. A tornado comes out of nowhere, and that's when Jordan disobeys Clark and goes public so he can have people acknowledge how great he is. At the end of the episode, Lex Luthor shows up at the Kent farm to threaten Lois into not writing again. Of course, she has no intention of abiding by his wishes. All in all, I hated this episode. So many characters were behaving out of character. Jordan has regressed back to Season 1 behavior. Lois and Clark's parenting was out of character for them. Clark actually said to Jordan that Jordan had to obey his rules as long as Jordan lived under his roof. This was largely an intro into biker Lex Luthor, and it seems odd to so intensely introduce a new villain at this late stage in the season. For me, it would have worked better if at the end of the final episode of the season, if Lex Luthor is next season's big villain, how about show Lex Luthor walking out of prison then, letting us know that a new villain was coming, but also giving us a completed story arc for the current season. I personally don't know how they fix this at this point. In the final episode, I don't know how they're going to do that. I'll get more into this then, but the pacing of this season seems to have been a mess. This episode was inconsistent with the rest of the season and the series, and I really didn't like what I saw. It felt like a character assassination so that they could push changes in the show that I think they're doing for the new ownership. They've been renewed, I think, based on this new change in tone, which is going in a darker direction, and will be eliminating a lot of the supporting cast, including General Lane. So, as I said, I did not like this episode. How about you, old man?
I agree with you that this was probably not only the worst episode of this season, but the worst episode of the series. Mainly because one of the reasons both you and I have watched this show and have suggested to other people that they watch it is it was a good family show. It had material that you could sit down with your entire family, like in the old days, in front of the living room television and watch together if you chose to do that activity. What you didn't mention was at the end of this episode, they showed Bizarro, or Zombie Bizarro, I guess in this case, because Mannheim's formula, I guess, resurrected him in a non-useful state mentally. He was eating rats in the corner of, was it a subway station or something?
That was the laboratory that was under Mannheim's townhouse. He was in that train car that Mannheim was going to use to escape. But now apparently that's where Bizarro has been living, eating rats.
And they were pretty graphic, showing this rat, and then Bizarro was like eating the rat like a drumstick chicken.
It was disgusting.
And then at the end there, you didn't see this, but it was strongly implied because Lex Luthor found Bizarro because he was going to use Bizarro to get back at Superman, because after Lex Luthor visited the Kent farm and basically threatened Lois to stop writing or else, then he walked away and said, Superman's next, and then this scene happened. So apparently he's going to use Bizarro to try to get back at Superman. But anyway, it seemed like after Bizarro was done eating his little rat, that he jumped Lex Luthor's second in command and ate him too. You didn't see it because it was off camera, but you could hear things that sounded like he was gnawing on Lex Luthor's second in command.
It was heavily implied that that was what was going on. If this is the direction this show is now taking, this is not what I signed on for. I wanted to watch Superman and Lois raising their sons and the struggles that they came up against with that. I found it refreshing that there was no Lex Luthor in this series, except for him sitting in prison already. I feel like this is territory we've been over and over and over again. And this whole injustice route that they're taking with Bizarro and now Lex Luthor out of prison. I don't want to watch this anymore. I'm going to watch the final episode of this season, but unless they create a frigging miracle, there's no way I'm going to be watching season 4.
You and I talked about this episode after it was finished because I think we were both stunned at what we watched. If this was the pilot episode of a new series, I'm not sure I'd be watching episode 2. The Lex Luthor stuff, not just the threatening of the Kent farm, but a good part of the episode, because it kept going back and forth between different storylines, was Lex Luthor in prison just showing how horrible he can be. I don't know how this was supposed to be Lex Luthor. This was like a biker guy. At least that's how it looked to me. Like this was some biker thug. Yet this was supposed to be Lex Luthor. I guess toughening him up in prison turned him into biker dude. Why would you introduce this character? You've already finished the Mannheim stuff. You've got threads going on all over the place that you introduced with the kids, with Jordan being exposed for being the hero that's saving people. You've got Kyle and Jonathan at the fire station trying to resolve that activity. You've got Kyle dealing with finding out he just found out that Clark was Superman, and all they touched on here was Kyle behaving and saying, when Clark talked to him about Jonathan and giving special favors to Jonathan, Kyle was like, oh, well, you're Superman. Any friend of Superman, I'm going to help out Superman. And both you and I talked, and we didn't think Kyle would act like that at all. We thought Kyle would say something like, well, I want you to know, Kent, Superman or not, you're still that guy down the street that used to play D&D or whatever. That would have been more fitting to what Kyle would have done, the Kyle we knew for the rest of the series.
Yeah, because they grew up together. There was already a dynamic there. I felt robbed even that they didn't show us the conversation, the entirety of the conversation between Clark and Kyle when Clark told him that he was Superman. I would have liked to have seen that whole conversation, but they didn't show us that. There were a number of things like that in this season that I felt like we, the audience, were being shortchanged as far as the storytelling and the acting go. Why weren't these actors being given the material they deserve to have to act to the best of their ability? They were being screwed out of that too. I don't know who wrote this episode. I didn't look. Honestly, at this point, I'm not that invested anymore. Earlier in the season, I would have to see what the writing credentials were for whoever wrote this abomination. But this was terrible. This was going back to my complaints about the beginning of the season with the kids at their fancy party and just being inconsistent in their behavior. Jordan now shows no character growth whatsoever from season 1. And this is just, it's all writing because this is all storytelling. And whoever was tasked with writing this episode, I don't know what their marching orders were for this, but this was terrible. This was absolutely terrible. I would recommend to people that they stop with episode 11 and just call that the end of the season, because that's where the Mannheim story winds up. And Lois, she has her surgery. There was no discussion in this episode about what her biopsy results were or any kind of prognosis or anything like that. And this was supposed to be several weeks after her surgery. It just felt like this was not well done at all. I don't know who wrote this, but this was bad. This was really bad.
The tone of this episode, although the actors were playing characters named the same thing, the tone was all over the place. I think the only character that felt like they were the same person was maybe Lana, possibly Sam Lane, but the rest of the characters just felt off somehow. I guess Jonathan felt like himself. The thing is, in this episode, there were a few things I did like in isolation, not mixed in with the rest of the stuff going on. At the very, very beginning, the episode opened with Lois giving a voiceover that Molly explained about how Lois was having doubts about whether she would have confidence and see herself as the same person. You had visuals of her standing in front of a mirror and then looking in profile and obviously looking at where she had the surgery.
It was her lack of breasts. They showed her wearing a bandage around her chest, and she is quite flat-chested now.
And that was a good start to this, and then she was wincing in pain through this kind of montage of things. And they showed Clark helping her with activities like washing her hair and just doing basic activities because she needed help doing that. And that was a great start to the episode. That's how the very beginning of the episode started. And I thought we were going to be in for a treat because the Mannheim stuff was done and we were going to kind of slow burn and resolve all these threads to finish out the season. And they just jammed this Luthor stuff in there. Yes, I understand they set up Luthor getting out of prison in this season, but that's what next season is for. Because between our last review and this review, it was announced that Superman and Lois did get renewed for season 4 with huge caveats. They are shrinking the cast down almost entirely. Only the family is going to survive. I've only heard that Lois, Clark, and the 2 sons are for sure going to survive.
And this Luthor character.
And Luthor, yeah. But he was just introduced, so I don't even count him. Sam Lane, gone. I'm assuming John Henry and Natalie, gone. I don't know if Kyle, I don't think Kyle, if he comes back, it's going to be kind of in a special guest star or something like a onesie-twosie. I think that season 4 is going to be a train wreck. Even before this episode aired, hearing that cast cutback that they were doing, and they're talking about a budget cutback big time, I think that this is going to be a train wreck in season 4. And I agree with Molly. I think the last episode, it tied up the Mannheim stuff, and that should have been the finale. If they weren't going to finish up in a proper finale, they should have just ended with that episode.
Well, I also question how they can continue living in Smallville, but write all of those other characters out of the show. They're going to have to move out of there, or else, there's some sort of bomb and everybody gets killed off.
They're probably going to move to Metropolis, which is what we, at the very beginning of the season, when those kids were at that party and we were worried it was going to be Metropolis-centered, and we were happily surprised it was not. Now I have a feeling they're going to do exactly what we didn't want them to do.
Well, because I think from the very beginning, they have been wanting to write this more like a Gotham Knights show, which got canceled for good reason because it was terrible. And that's what they're desperately trying to turn this into. I don't know why they can't just embrace this as a family show and return to the roots that they started with back at the very beginning of season 1. But this is turning into something that I don't want to watch.
I do want to mention the 3 things that I liked in this episode, but I have to take them in isolation. This is not an endorsement of, and how they presented these were great. This is more of, geez, I wish these scenes were in a different episode. One was the montage at the beginning with Lois. I thought that was really well done, and I wish the episode would have continued. The second one was when Clark confronted Kyle and asked him, please don't treat my son any differently. And then Kyle talked to Jonathan, and basically Kyle said, you need to bring these problems to me if you're having a problem. Don't go through your daddy. He didn't quite say it that way, but the implication was, don't go through your daddy. You're becoming a man. Why don't you come to me and talk to these yourself? Molly mentioned to me, because we talked a little bit about this after the episode, Molly mentioned that what would have made more sense is Jonathan talking to his dad about this made sense based on the relationship. But Clark should have given the advice, son, you're 16 now, you just got your license, you got to start handling these things for yourself. Why don't you talk to Kyle and get this worked out? Useful parenting information. That's how that should have went down. The exchange between Kyle and Jonathan about, if you've got problems, come to me, don't go to your daddy. I thought that was good advice from Kyle, but that should have came from Clark.
Yeah, I completely agree.
And then the third one, I know Molly didn't appreciate as much as I did, but there was a scene when Jordan, he was not listening to his dad. He was very much exposing potential for people to figure out who he was. He helped Superman diffuse that tornado that came out of nowhere, and I agree. It just seemed like they stuck it in there quickly for a story idea, but Kansas tornado. Of all the problems I had in the episode, that was my least problematic thing.
Well, I got a problem with it. After living in a place that was prone to tornadoes, they don't just come out of nowhere like that. They just don't. This was done by, I'm just going to say this, it felt like it was written by somebody who doesn't understand tornado conditions at all. And you're right, it was shoehorned in there for drama and to create the plot point that they wanted. And the other thing is that if John Henry was around, why wouldn't he have come out to try to help?
I think that actor's done.
Well, obviously.
I mean, maybe we'll see next week if him and Natalie are even in it, but because you mentioned to me earlier, they skipped over earlier in the season, John Henry was going to meet up with his family in New Orleans because Mannheim basically threatened that family. They never showed anything that John Henry was doing in New Orleans. Let's not worry about that. It's almost like let's get him out of the stories for a while. We'll just say he's over there doing that.
Yeah.
But I want to finish up what I was saying.
Please finish about Jordan.
This tornado happened, and Jordan joined Superman Jordan in costume, joined Superman to try to defuse the tornado. And they did defuse the tornado. As they were defusing it, Superman was telling Jordan to go home. I don't need your help. Because in the story, he was almost bragging that guy, whoever the secret superhero was a kick-ass character. Geez, isn't he cool? Too bad we don't know who he is. It's almost like he wanted to expose his identity to the rest of the populace. And so they took away his goggles and his suit. Both Sam and Clark took those, and Lois took the costume away from Jordan. So that was before this tornado. So when Jordan offered to help, that was after Clark said, you need to just retire for a while. So when Jordan landed after the tornado was diffused, he had his goggles and his costume on. He was standing there posing with these high school kids on their cell phones to be uploaded to social media. And then afterwards, when Jordan got home, there was a confrontation with Lois and Clark talking to Jordan, and Jordan was being a belligerent teenager. The scene where Jordan and Clark were having some heated words, Jordan was walking away, and Clark tried to grab him, and Jordan, because they added an effect, Jordan was trying to use some extra strength to get away from him, get away from Clark, and it didn't work. And Jordan was super surprised, and the actor did a great job, Jordan, because when that brute force move didn't work, and Clark basically put him back, Jordan's eyes, I mean, the actor, he got bug eyes. You could tell he was surprised and scared, and I think he realized who he was dealing with when he was trying to do that stuff. That's when Clark was telling him, don't you ever do that to me again. Basically, try to use your abilities, your physical force, to try to win an argument or to try to get away from something. Which reminded me a bit of kind of the She-Hulk conversation going on. That was like the only piece of dialogue Clark was giving that made any sense. The you live in my house, my rules. That didn't make any sense to me, the way Clark was laying down the law like that. He grew up with this kid. This kid in season 1 was diagnosed with all these emotional problems. Why did you think that was going to work? But the whole tone of this episode was wrong. But anyway, that scene, like just the scene of the belligerent son trying to use his extra ability, which the only person probably on the planet that could have stopped him from doing that was Superman standing right in front of him. And Jordan immediately realized that that's who he was dealing with. And he got scared and surprised when that happened. Jordan did. So those were the three only pieces of this that I enjoyed. The Jonathan piece at the fire station with Kyle, the Jordan confrontation with Clark, and then the Lois piece at the beginning. The rest of this episode was essentially garbage. I do not have anything I can offer to entice somebody to watch this episode. Disappointed is the nicest thing I can think of when describing this episode. Molly goes on the other end. She actively hates this episode.
I do. I also have questions about John Henry and Natalie and Mateo. What's going to happen to Mateo now? Where is he?
They have one episode left to tie all these pieces together. They already had a full plate, and they added this Lex Luthor crap on the second to last episode. Why in the heck would you do that?
And apparently Lana and John Henry, that's just out the window. Again, you write these things, and there should be some sort of payoff for the viewers, because people do get invested in these characters and in the storylines. And for them to just drop that like they have, that is so insulting. I don't know if it was on purpose or they're just incompetent or what's going on, but this has just been a mess. And at this point, if I was put in a decision-making position, I would not have renewed this show given how this is ending like this.
It's a mess.
Yeah.
We're going to finish up the final episode. Luckily, we have one more episode. We will reevaluate over the season break. But as it is now, unless they give us something to hold on to for the next episode, I think this is our final season of reviewing this. Because we reviewed this because we wanted a break from all the crappy stuff we had been reviewing, like we're currently reviewing Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which that first episode of Season 2 was complete garbage. We cover that because we both are old school Star Trek fans, and we want to be able to document the disgrace that's going down at CBS and Paramount. We reviewed this as a counterbalance to this. We wanted something we could praise to balance out all that negative crap that was happening in those Star Treks. Well, after this episode, I left with a similar negative feeling after watching this episode that I got from a lot of those Strange New Worlds, Discovery, Picard, that I need soap to wash this stuff off. And that's how I felt after watching this episode.
It would take a miracle to fix this in the one final episode of the season. And given their past performance, there's just no way they're going to be able to pull that off.
Zombie Bizarro eating that rat and then that Luthor's assistant, in no way anywhere else in this series, all 3 seasons, was that set up as being a thing that would ever be shown on this television show. I would not have recommended, both of us would not have recommended this show to you guys out there if it even had an inkling that they could possibly do something like that. Watching somebody eating a rat and then making like gnawing sounds while they were eating the rat. Nom, 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 nom. And then making similar type sounds when off camera they're probably eating a person. We never would have recommended this show if we knew it was capable of that. We were saying this was wholesome family entertainment.
Not anymore.
Yeah, it's not anymore. Shame on whatever's left of the CW. Shame on you for what you did here. You just lost 2 people supporting the show. We've got an itty-bitty channel, but we were trying our best to get the message out there, and you just wasted that. You didn't need to introduce this Lex Luthor until maybe the very, very end of next week. You didn't need to do that, but you did it. And you're not going to close up all these threads that you have open now. This is a train wreck of a season. It had some really shining moments, but this is a train wreck of a season. It's ending badly. That's how I'm going to remember this show, and there is a really good chance, especially hearing how much retooling is going to happen for next season. I don't even know if I want to even try to watch next season.
I'm not going to. If this is who Lex Luthor is, I don't want to watch this. I don't know how in line with canon it is. The image of Lex Luthor that we've grown up with, or at least I did, of this suit-wearing, more white-collar crook.
But they made him out to be some sort of...
thug.
Yeah, just a thug.
Yeah.
So I'm disappointed. I'm sorry that the show ended like this. I have nothing to do with the show. But for those of you that stuck around, and even on our advice, started watching the show, I still would suggest watch season 1, watch season 2. You can even get through season 3, but stop at last episode 11, right? Was last week?
Yes.
Stop there. Don't watch the rest of this crap. We're going to finish up next week, and then we're done with Superman and Lois. I don't care if season 4 happens unless we get some really awesome trailers to show they're refinding their family roots again. I don't think I want to watch this show anymore. It's going to be another CW show, just like The Flash and Supergirl, and we were exempting this from all that stuff, and it's going to turn into that. At least that's what it looks like to me, and I don't want to watch that crap.
Welcome to Arrowverse Superman. Yeah, I'm not watching. Well, anybody else have the misfortune of watching this monstrosity? How did you feel about it? Leave us your thoughts in the comments below.
Take care.